I am delighted to introduce Dr. Andree Leighton this morning, who will kick off our first keynote. She serves as Assistant Professor and Director of the Center for Academic Innovation and Creativity at Mount St. Mary's University. Dr. Leighton also works collaboratively with the university's first seminar program and CSJ Institute. The common thread through all of her work is supporting students, faculty, and staff with integrating the CSSJ heritage in meaningful ways individually and socially. What I will add to her bio that's not written in our program is that Dr. Leighton is a master teacher. In our interactions, I've been able to witness her love and passion for students as embedded in our CSJ charism. You will learn more about the love of the dear neighbor and how well it can be integrated into our curriculum, co-curricular activities for our students. I'm so delighted that she will be keynoting for us this morning. Thank you, Dr. Leighton.
Thank you so much, Anita. Thank you for that very kind and warm welcome. And I want to, especially in beginning, thank Anita and Martha and Mary Galvin and Shannon Green for making this opportunity available today. I'm very grateful to learn and grow together in this way and to have these 3 days to do that. So the presentation is a walkthrough of different assignments and activities that illustrate ways to integrate the CSSJ heritage into coursework and also reflect a student-centered active learning approach. So both of those elements could inform our ongoing conversations about developing a CSSJ pedagogy. And within the CSSJ family, my home institution, Mount St. Mary's University in Los Angeles. So most of what I'm most familiar with is the CSJ specific. So that shows in the different assignments and activities I'm going to share. And these activities come from introductory political science courses in American government and world politics, and also courses in the Mount's first year seminar program, as Anita mentioned. So to begin, the way I introduce this work with students is to talk about the CSSJ heritage as a living heritage that is available to all, regardless of faith or no faith. So more than once, I've heard the CSJs at the Mount say that the charism is available to all, to any who wish to take it up and live into it. So in my experience, there's a transcendent and universal quality to the charism principles and callings of the that the CSSJs share with us. And I also mentioned to students that the word Catholic has multiple meanings depending on whether it is capitalized or not. So to be Catholic in a universal sense is being very broad and open. So that's in recognition that students come from many different places into the spaces in our classrooms, as well as we ourselves as faculty and staff. So with that as a bit of an introduction, I'll just go into some sharing. So the first couple of activities I'll share are informed by the CSJ calls to action. I'm going to share screen. So is the screen share? Oops.
Looks good.
Okay. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so the CSJ calls to action come from a congregational chapter meeting in 2013. And at that time, the CSJ gathering came to 5 calls to action. And I have them listed here. They are all unpacked more fully in an 18-page document that the students read. But the focuses of communion within the earth community, church, the people of God, living the CSJ charism, claiming our oneness through relationships and structures for mission, and partnering with new eyes. So from that, with that background and activity from a world politics, so that's what the document looks like as a PDF that the students read. And it shares a preamble and some of the history of the congregation. And each of the calls is detailed with statements of belief, commitment, and action. So students have that coming into this exercise. And then the activity that they do is, this is from an Introduction to World Politics course. They explore the calls to action and how they see them in action. So it's the calls to action in action. How do they see them in action at the Mount, in the world, in their lives and their communities? And we talk about how to broaden the reference point for church as people of God, that refers to any community of people of goodwill. So church in many spaces church can be in many places other than a building or a structure. The church also, when you have people coming together in goodwill, living the CSJ charism, any action that lends itself toward unifying and toward loving, and regard for each other as dear and as neighbors. And then the relationships and structures for mission, those can be specific procedures, institutions, agencies that support that action. And then importantly, partnering with new eyes, especially in the light of meeting the needs of the very dynamic needs of our times, and also living in a globalized world. What are the pathways for reaching out with people that we haven't connected with before, or might even have considered as other in some way? So the students populate this worksheet and this is done usually in a kind of flipped classroom sort of dimension, where it's introduced in class, they work on it outside of class, and then come back into class and do either in a Zoom context, breakout rooms discussing it, and then ultimately a large group sharing. And all of these things, when I've introduced them, they've been in the spirit of experimentation. And certainly I'm learning as much as anything else in how the students are responding. But the common thread in the feedback to this exercise in particular is that the students find it very valuable, like they hadn't thought about connecting things from the spiritual heritage or a consciousness heritage to the political world. And specifically, they're often making connections with the United Nations in this respect, because that's a lot of what we would have been exploring in the course at this point. So that's one activity that's centered with the calls, with bringing the calls to action alive and applying them in different ways. Another activity for the calls to action, this is from the first year seminar course at Mount St. Mary's. And one of the courses in the second semester of the first year seminar program, students take a section that's focused on one of the different pillars of distinction at the Mount that forms the core curriculum. So that's referred to as LACE. And I think in 2019, there was a presentation about the LACE curriculum at the Mount. But one of these pillars is Spirit of the Founders. So for this assignment, this was a semester toward the end of the semester assignment, the students had been oriented to the 5 calls to action and had been working with them throughout the course, integrating in the section that I've taught. It's with a professor in the English department. So we were integrating world literature, political science, and the calls to action. So they would read different selections and content from each of those disciplines that were related to each of the calls to action. At the beginning of the semester, the students also were asked, after they had read the calls to action document, to identify a sixth call that would be personal to them, that they would pursue and cultivate over the course of the semester. So this activity was for them to really present and share their sixth call to action and how it had evolved over, this is from an accelerated timeframe course, so over 8 weeks, and then making connections between their call and the disciplines they had studied, an opportunity to include a creative expression, and then concluding with a reflection about their growth as self-directed learners. So also inviting them to look at, these are metacognitive kinds of questions as well, and also looking at how are you making the CSJ heritage your own? So giving students the opportunity to express and work, again, making the calls real in their lives and in their worlds. So moving from there, so the calls to action kinds of activities, that's one line. And then another is learning about the history of the Six Sisters going out into the corners of the city in Le Puy. I've just come to refer to that, and Shannon Green knows, has been very supportive with this too, that I refer to it as the Le Puy method, that it's a kind of a form in social science of what's called action research, or collaboration-based community research. Those are two kinds of threads that sort of lend themselves to the kind of action that the sisters engaged in. So in this world politics course, this was during our time with Synchronous, so this was virtual. So they had a field research experience using documentaries through a service, a streaming service that our library makes available to us. And so the idea was meeting the needs of global times. So the students would go out into the global city and learn more about what people need. So there's an introduction to bring them into like the sisters who went out into the streets of Le Puy, were going out into the global village, going out into the global city. And we conducted this exercise with a rhythm of going out into the city and then coming back to the kitchen. So they would go out, they each watched a unique documentary that they chose, so giving them agency and choice in their learning process. So they chose a global issue of interest to them and watched a documentary, and then debriefed back in the kitchen in our Zoom space with their classmates. So, and from there, designed some practical, keeping their own momentum going and identifying ways, some actions that could help address the global issue. So that they went through this exercise that included a pretty thorough debrief from the film, and then our time together in the Zoom kitchen. So again, this was introduced in class. They had time to schedule in watching a documentary, an hour, 2.5, and taking notes, preparing a debrief. And then that was done in class in open forum in the Zoom space. Another application of the Le Puy method of this approach in an American government course has to do, this is a project that I've run a number of times. There's a very small, what's called a pocket park that's adjacent to Mount St. Mary's Doheny campus, and it's part of the Los Angeles Public Parks System, Parks and Recreation Department. And its name is St. James Park. So we do an exercise in what if we were going to redesign the park to better serve the needs of the surrounding community, what might that look like? And so this activity, it's designed to support some key learning outcomes and to live into them. So the spirit of the founders in the CSJ heritage to experience themselves and each other as part of a living heritage, and to practice Catholic social teaching, the model of see, assess, act, and that's done in collaboration, which is another way of neighboring, of dear neighboring with one another. And then on the political science side, experiencing agency, efficacy, and creativity through community action as service. And then the opportunity to practice action research, critical thinking, and group work, collaboration through group work. This is an aerial view of St. James Park. Thank you, Google Maps. But you can see it's a very simple, small design. And then the process for this activity was the results I'm sharing in this presentation were from a class of students. There were 16 students. They were primarily first-year students from diverse majors, which is very common in the American government and world politics courses. And the students were divided into 4 groups of 4, and they were pre-assigned to mix different majors and different what year, where students were on their trajectory. And it played out in a Tuesday, Thursday class of 90 minutes. And typically there would be course content for the first 45 to 60 minutes, and then project work for the remaining time. And this activity, I'm sharing a version that was done when we were still on the ground, and I'm happy to report I'm conducting it now with my summer class, and it's working just fine virtually with an adaptation where the students are it's an individual project right now for the students, and they're identifying the public park that's closest to their home and that they feel comfortable visiting. So I'll be able to report back how it goes in that format. But that's, so how it played out in time. Introducing students to the Lepuy method. That happens in class, revisiting the 6 sisters. And again, this rhythm of going out into the community and then coming back to the kitchen, letting them know that that was what the rhythm would be, and making active use of the learning management system. At the Mount, we use Canvas, but the students also made use of Google Docs and Google Jamboard for brainstorming. And the first session, the students took an actual field trip to the park, and they could collect their observations, take photos, get a feel for the park, and they completed a field notes worksheet related to that. And then that was in preparation then to prepare for the next session. So this is also this mix of active learning that's flipped classroom, some of the work being done asynchronously to make the maximum use of activity time in the classroom or in the Zoom space. So the students did research about St. James Park. They looked up its history. They had the opportunity to compare it with a personal public park. They learned how to work with census data by zip codes. They watched a PBS video about the role of public parks in American life. And they read a journal article about the role of parks for people in terms of mental health support, community, family, various dimensions that are important to community life. Then they prepared a community stakeholder map, where once they gathered information from the census, they were to put themselves in the shoes of the different demographic groups that they saw displayed in the census, and put the voice of those groups into the circles, and then things they might say or that they might care about in relation to the park into the squares. So this is one of those autofill PDFs where students can type in the park, and then the different, they can put one, 8 people aged 18 to 25, or college students, or young children, those, to give them a voice. What do you imagine might be some of the things that they would care about, or that might enhance the park from in their experience, from their perspective. So then the students, I'm wondering if my slides are jumping too fast. Okay. So yeah, the other piece of work that they had to do was to construct a survey to, like, if you were going to administer a survey in the community in that zip code area. So they created a 10-item survey, and it needed to include a mix of closed item questions, Likert scale items, and open item questions. So giving, again, like how to get to know a community more fully, so that however a design would unfold, it would be according to the needs of the times, on the terms of the people who have the needs. So then they also they were responsible in the group work. They each had to come up with something that they were contributing to the park design, and what was their rationale for it. So they needed to have a rationale for it that was based on the census data, the video they watched, the article, so that there would be some kind of backing for whatever it was they thought would be a good idea for the park. And then they, as a class as a whole, coming up with ideas for a community involvement activity. So how to invite people to the park and have some kind of a gathering or event that would open things up to the community to start to explore these ideas, and where their ideas could be presented as a starting point, like as something to start conversation, as something generative. And then they would collaborate together to create their final design. And this is kind of taking to the end, so they had their walk in the park, and this is on their final day, and they drew their designs on the whiteboards in the classroom. And then we took pictures of them. The pictures look like that. There we go. So they had the pictures with their different designs and the elements that they included, and they each gave the park some kind of a tagline, a place of peace, serenity, looks like unity and fun. So that is the LePuy method with a public park focus. And the next two that I'm going to share are ones I'm I'm going to try them with my summer class. So they haven't happened yet. So I'll be able to report back once I give these a roll, but I'm interested to see how students might respond. So one is an activity to bring in terms of the Catholic intellectual tradition and the emphasis on a dialogue of faith with reason. I'm interested to see what students might do with an exercise where they choose a social issue, a social political issue that they care about, that's particularly relevant or that they're interested in, and just have a dialogue exercise of making statements of faith, knowing, or trust, what that's spiritually informed in whatever way they relate to spirit, and then putting that with statements of reason, and just seeing what happens as an activity. And this is another one where I think we'll learn a lot together, and I'm just really interested to see what might come forward from that. And then to close out this political science class this semester, a reflection looking at the Sisters of St. Joseph consensus statement, and this quote about democracy from the late political scientist E.E. Schatzschneider, which is in every syllabus I have. It's actually, when I was introduced to this quote about democracy when I was a first-year student at Cabrini University in Pennsylvania. And it impacted me in such a way that I changed my major from Spanish communications to Spanish political science. So, but I had never read a statement, referring to democracy and its involvement with a love of people. So when I look at the consensus statement and this statement about democracy side by side, I see resonance and curious to see how students relate to that. So more in terms of the living heritage and having the eyes to see it and being awake to it in the ways, again, that are unique to each of us. And then I also want to just thank very much. I'm deeply grateful to be serving at an institution that has done so much to lift up the CSJ heritage in so many different ways. From the first year seminar program where students take a CSJ workshop, all the way through to taking integrative scholarship courses, some of which are very purposefully focused on the spirit of the founders, and just the work that's also done toward meaningful assessment of that work. So I'm thankful to Michelle Starkey and the folks who have worked on the curriculum committee, everyone who's worked on developing some of the rubrics that we have. And this is just an example of a rubric that is used in integrative scholarship courses at the Mount that have a spirit of the founders focus as the pillar of emphasis. So just to see that as a reference point, ways to assess student work and have some hinge points to support, to basically see how students are doing, to learn from student experience and to refine as we go, using the rubric one of my colleagues at the Mount refers to rubrics as like flowers. It's like ways to bloom. So wanted to share an example of that. And we also have, through the CSJ Institute at the Mount, Shannon Green has compiled a working bibliography of Spirit of the Founders related materials that faculty and staff and Mount community members can access. And they're sectioned into the intellectual tradition, the history of the sisters, Catholic social teaching, films, and the oral history project, which some of you may be familiar with. It's on YouTube. So there's a lot of support. And for myself, I created a sort of mandala. It's just something I open up when I'm preparing for class, or it's just a point of reflection that supports me ongoing in the spirit of unifying love and teaching with that in my heart, in my consciousness. But these points of metacognition, inviting students to metacognition, self-directed learning, integrating the intellectual tradition, social teaching, ever an eye to meeting the needs of the times, transparency, and the CSJ heritage as a living heritage, the Lepuy method, dear neighboring, all we are capable of, and doing that with the spirit of Saint Joseph, the gentleness and joy, and the emphasis on excellence and peace. And there are so many ways. I mean, I've shared some particular disciplinary ways to integrate the heritage. We recently, Meredith Lynch, who's the assistant director for the CSJ Institute at the Mount, we held a showcase of student work that was informed by the CSJ heritage. So we had a student who had created some beautiful poems based on the maxims. And so, so there's endless possibilities and opportunities for creativity and innovation in this area. And my closing encouragement would just be that small hinges swing big doors. So even if you take a moment and think for yourself, what is the next small step for you with integrating the CSSJ heritage into your work, whether that's work as faculty or as staff or administration and the CSSJ community at large. So that concludes, that's my presentation. I might be finished a little early, but happy for any questions. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you all.
Yes, one of the final comments, and they're all coming in, flying in, was that this was an absolutely brilliant presentation. And so I thank you for that. And I'm so delighted that you were all able to hear from Andree and to really have your creativity stimulated in terms of how we can really build out the CSJ principles in all of our work as an administration in our higher education institutions. We are going to do something slightly different with our time. Each of us will be breaking out into groups, so that we're going to do this 3 times over the next 2 days. Andree has provided us some facilitating questions to really think about each of the sessions and how they play out. I love that people are starting to think about ideas. Yes, we will have some type of repository for the ideas that Andree has shared, but also from ideas, because I know that on this call, there are tons of creative ways of really integrating the CSJ charisms into our work. So we will be breaking into groups according to our roles. We have facilitators assigned with the questions that we have from Andree from this first session. We're going to be in our small groups for 20 minutes, and then we will turn for large group processing and for Q&A for Andree. So I'll wait till they post the breakout groups. There we go. So we endeavored this yesterday. So you should now have the link to join a breakout group. More ideas to come. So
Anita?
yes.
There's one question I just saw that I would like to address in terms of how students have responded to this. And I have, to date, I have not had any resistance or grudgingness. And that may partly be due to how it's introduced, you know, that I give students a very open way to, I offer a very open way to relate to all of this. So I haven't had any experience of anybody feeling indoctrinated or inflicted upon in any way. Like it's been a very positive, a very warm learning, generative experience to date.
Great. Okay. Looks like everyone has come back. I did get an opportunity to pop into most of the breakout groups. So I hope that you have been just as stimulated by Andree and her examples as I have. We wanted to make some space for some of the groups to report out ideas that you have shared, and then Andree can field a couple of questions before we move on to our break and then our second session for the day. And feel free to use the chat to make comments or questions.
I'll make a comment.
Go ahead.
Sue McCauley from Avila. I want to thank my group. Wow, what a wonderful conversation. We came up with some great ideas. And one of the things we realized is that we need to make the connections between helping the dear neighbor, taking care of the environment, whatever our majors are, with the CSJ heritage. That we talk this, we do it, we integrate it, but we have to be more specific about this is the CSJ heritage. So that was one of the things that came out of our group.
I'll add to that. We had a great group. I think that the benefit of having something as universal as unifying love to come back to and to really root in was something that really resonated with our group as something that we could see pointing back to. to make that intentional connection.
Andree, thank you both for those comments. I think on the way into the small groups, you were addressing the question that came up about how students respond to this. And I know for many of our campuses, we are becoming much more interfaith and fewer Catholic students. One of the groups talked about having an exercise with the nuns, which are students who come in with absolutely no faith. So Andree, can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, I think that some of the groups talked about that sense of unifying love and care for each other. And certainly when you look at the issues that we've been facing since 2020, that need to love, that need to find worth and dignity in others and express that is critically important. But I want to give you space to speak to that again.
Well, I mean, you've really conveyed it, Anita. And it also just, to me, it raises, it's taking some time when introducing the integration of the heritage into any activity and putting it into a universal context, in a context where no matter where somebody is coming into the space, however they're coming, they're welcome, and they find when I look at the heritage and what I know of different faith traditions and no faith, these are universal calls of humanity, universal principles that people devote themselves to, and that have been, from many traditions seen as pathways to leading, what is a good life and how do we get there? Not only individually, but together as a society. So with that, and that's why I take so much time with even the calls to action, saying, okay, how can we relate to church people of God? If those words don't necessarily, but it's also another way of referring to a gathering of people in goodwill. So there are different ways that people can make entrance to it from where they are, and that it's also part of what differentiates their education at the particular institution they've chosen. So that it's also in that exposure and making it explicit, the students can also speak in their own way. They can articulate for themselves what Mount education means to them. What is St. Joseph, St. Kate, what all of the, these, what this education means and how it equips them to lead their lives and serve and contribute. So I definitely, as all of us keep, exploring with this, taking that time to introduce it in an inclusive way, I think is yeah.
Yeah, and I noticed that there are comments coming in. The Student Affairs group talked about that many of us probably embed some of the charisms, but don't do it in an explicit way for the students. And as I was listening to you speak, I was really thinking about the importance for all of us as we also move to have our student outcomes be linked to career skills and careers-based outcomes, that there's room for really talking about the importance of values and a values-based approach to education and to the work. If we think certainly about vocational calling and having that as a concept for our students, that all of this becomes really important for us to make sure that we articulating it very clearly so that the students can really talk about that value proposition for their education.
Yes, and if I may add, the other piece that I know we're focused on the student piece of this, but I think it is also important to remember, and this was another piece to that conversation, that we as a community of faculty and staff also need to have an understanding about how it intersects with our own work and how we are able to see it in our own lives. And so there were some who shared sort of the analogy of once you have this kind of an experience or an immersion or understanding about the charism of the SSJ or the CSJ, that you kind of walk in their footsteps, if you will. and that you find yourself embracing these values and the charism in your everyday life. And then we had some who could look at it from the lens of an alum, where it then influences how you put together your curriculum for your course, how you do that discernment in the classroom or with your colleagues through conversation. And then just having some opportunity, when we looked at what tools do we need, having some opportunity for development of tools to be able to use, sort of like a toolkit, like what Andree has presented to us today, that are very practical. And then someone shared just even taking a few moments prior to a meeting or a class or something like that to actually call out what those connections are.
Thanks for those comments, Linda.
And I should mention one other thing.
Go
The
ahead.
development of lay leadership was also
Yes.
very much present in the conversation.
Great. Thanks for sharing those points. I will say that this national gathering is a selfish gathering for me. I did have a not so covert motivation for us really to come together as a community and to think about sharing professional development practices and ideas, really sharing ways that we communicate to our students the value of a CSJ education, but more importantly, really building those bridges amongst all of us. I know that there are thanks coming into Martha Malinsky for being our executive director and coordinating this gathering and really focusing on the work. I'm hoping that this is just part one of more work that we will be able to continue to share. So on that note, Andree, I'll let you say and do a final word. We will take a break for 30 minutes. When we come back, we're going to dive into, just for a short time, more specifically Catholic social teaching and Catholic intellectual tradition as it relates to our work. But we're going to go right back into those breakout sessions with more questions to finish this work for this morning. So Andree.
May I just have one thing to say, please? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
It's
go ahead,
Carol Helms. So we started off yesterday with the consensus statement, and I just want to read the opening line. Stimulated by the Holy Spirit of love and receptive to the inspiration, we move always forward to profound love of God and love of neighbor without distinction. And if that wasn't embraced and shown today, so I thank you.
Thank you for that. Andree, I knew you would be fabulous. So
I don't, yeah, there's not, thank you very much, Sister Carol. That does it. That's a beautiful point to end. That's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you all.